Welcome back to our final element of Unit 4 in our course Research on Corporate Transparency. We are still thinking about capital markets, and now we want to visit this issue of information asymmetry. So from the last unit where last element, where we talked about Grossman and Stieglitz, you see that in the end, markets will never be fully informationally efficient. And you also see that information cost is a very dominant driver of the lack of informational efficiency of capital markets. So in other words, as the cost of acquiring information is positive, that means that there will never be a market where all this information is actually being impounded into price, and there will be investors on this market most likely with varying level of information. So now this gives rise to information asymmetry, and information asymmetry here is understood as the divergence of information levels across investors. Okay, so and this level of information asymmetry will have an effect on information precision. So information precision here, you need to understand this term as the amount of information that is impounded into price on a market. So if a market has a very high level of information precision, then all the available information is actually being reflected in price. So the price is a very precise signal of the underlying information. Whereas if, let's say, the information is not available to the market, either because the cost is too high or there are market microstructure frictions that avoid that the market can be actually using this information, then the price will be very imprecise in reflecting that information. Okay, and we know that information precision is having an effect on prices naturally, and also on cost of capital, if this precision is affecting something that also has effect on the covariance of expected returns. So in principle, you could argue that some price could simply be very uninformative about some idiosyncratic factor of a given stock, so that it really tells us very little about something, but this something that we don't know much about is still unrelated to the returns of other stocks in the market, right? So if this happens, so if we are insecure, if the price is imprecise about an aspect of a stock that is completely unrelated to other stocks, then in these cases, normally diversification should take care of this, imprecision, meaning that it is not being priced in expectation. So there is no return impact of this. Okay, but on the other hand, if the level of imprecision affects something that co-varies with other stock returns, then this is no longer diversifiable, and this means that it should be priced also reflect in terms of returns. Okay, so it should reflect expected returns, and this will have an impact of cost of capital. So information precision is being priced, it's being reflected in returns in the economy, but now we have to think about we have to think about the problem of asymmetry. So is information asymmetry being priced and reflected in returns? So this is a different question, because we're now thinking more about the variance of information across investors. And for us as accountants, this is very important, because in the end, we can, by changing the information environment, maybe affect the level of information asymmetry. We can also affect the level of precision directly, but we can also affect the level of asymmetry. And now for us, the question is, should we care about this? Should we say, okay, now it's important that we reduce the level of asymmetry, is because this has a direct impact, for example, of cost of capital. And this is an interesting question to study, right? So does this have an effect? And here, there's a class of models that is really interesting in that regard, and also that have also been very informative to the empirical literature. And these are market microstructure models that try to understand the price formation process and try to understand how heterogeneous investors and their information endowment affect the efficiency of this price formation process in the market microstructure. So the one reading that we have for this unit, the presidential address of Ohara in 2003 in Journal of Finance, I think this is a very nice paper to read in order to get a grip on this basic literature. I'm being very short on this here, and I apologize, but I can only urge you to read this presidential address, because I think Ohara, she really did an excellent job in outlining the general thoughts behind this approach, much better than I could do in this video. So please, by all means, pick up this paper and read it so that you get your head about this type of models. Okay. So now the model that I want to concentrate on here is also a model that is co-authored by Ohara. So Easley Ohara 2004. They have they develop a market microstructure model that really tries to address the impact of information asymmetry on asset pricing. Right. So it's a classic already. It's a very nice paper. Which I believe is really, really informative. The paper has been cited up and down in the literature, sometimes even, I think, without giving full justice to what the paper actually does. I will come back to this a little bit. But in essence, what the paper is, it is a paper that uses a multi-asset noisy rational expectations framework. So what does this mean? It is a framework where there are multiple assets, but the returns of these assets are uncorrelated. By the way, this is important. But so these multiple assets, they have noisy supply. So that means the amount of assets, the number of assets that are being supplied is stochastic. So that the investors know, of course, the distribution of the supply, but they don't know the exact supply numbers. So this sounds a little bit technical and alien, because normally you would expect, well, we should know the amount of assets that are out there for trade. But the idea is here that there is a second type of investor that is also in the market, so some noise investors, and these investors are actually important because they create a general level of insecurity in the market that is important to actually create liquidity. So this is a little bit akin to the discussion that we had towards the end of Grossman and Stiglitz, because in Grossman and Stiglitz says, well, if everything is transparent, then there is no liquidity left. And this is exactly the same intuition here. You have to have some fuzziness in the market, so actually that the incentives for trade actually materialize. And this is what in these classes of models like the Easley Ohara 2004 paper, which is actually being produced by noisy supply here. So it's a little bit of a trick, if you want, a modeling trick in order to get the thing going. Okay, so now in this framework with these multiple uncorrelated assets, there's also a risk-free asset, right? And then we have two types of investors. There is an uninformed group that receives public signals about assets, so information signals, they receive information signals, but only public signals. And there is an informed group that on top receives additional private signals on these assets. The total amount of signals that is available to the market is fixed. So it's really a distributional story here. So you have two types of investors. One type of investors gets a share of the signals, and the other type of the investors get all the signals. Okay. So now, this is, this modeling setup is very rich and can actually give us some very interesting insights. And I try to summarize the main insights here on this one slide. And of course, I'm not doing full justice to this incredibly rich paper, but anyhow. So now the first thing that you see is directly related to the discussion that we have with Grossman and Stiglitz. So our poor uninformed investors, they are uninformed, but they're not dumb, right? So they are still rational and they can form rational expectations. So they will learn some information from price. Yeah, so they will see what the informed investors do to the price, and they can learn from it. But at the same time, obviously, this learning process is not perfect. So they don't get all the information. So that means that the precision is not optimal, right? So the precision is not optimal in the sense that it reflects all available signals in price. So that means now we have two heterogeneous groups of investors. The informed group of investors has full information. The uninformed group has only partial information, although they learn from price. And that means that information asymmetry is not being removed through the pricing process. So that's the first thing. So information asymmetry is there, although markets exist and markets produce, let's say, gather information from the informed investors and make this information publicly available through the price process, but only partly so. So the information asymmetry is not fully removed. Okay. So now what this then produces is, it produces a fact that is important to understand. Our two investor groups will end up holding different portfolios in equilibrium. Okay? So this is different from the CAPM world, right? In a CAPM world where everything is homogeneous, or everybody ends up holding the market portfolio in equilibrium, right? So here, this is not the case. We have informed investors that have a higher weight on stocks on which they are more informed, and then we have our poor informed investors, and they have a lower part of their assets, of their wealth invested in these stocks where they don't have full information. So this sounds reasonable, right? So you might also question, why do these poorly informed investors invest in these stocks at all? Why don't they only invest into the risk-free asset? Simply because, although they are risk averse, mixing in some risky assets is increasing their utility, because otherwise they would only earn the risk-free rate basically, and this would be this would be inferior to them, also holding some risky assets. So they will end up holding some risky assets, although they know that they are at an informational disadvantage compared to the informed investors. So that's, I think, an important finding. The next thing is, they have a lower weight of these assets compared to the informed investors. But what is even worse is that they will end up holding systematically the wrong assets in this portfolio. Meaning that those risky assets that they hold, they will be holding too many of the poor performing assets and too few of the well-performing assets. Well, why is this? It's relatively straightforward. It is because the informed investors, they know the type of the stocks, so they have the signals, so they can better assess whether these are well-performing or poor-performing stocks. And of course, they will have more demand for the well-performing stocks and higher willingness to pay, and so they end up getting those. Yeah. So, and whereas the ones that they know about more, that they're not that well-performing, they will have a lower willingness to pay. And while the other investors, the uninformed investors, they have to, for them, these two groups of stocks are pooled. So they will have one willingness to pay for both of these groups, and that means that in the end they will end up holding, more of the poor type stocks and less of the good type stocks. Okay, so again, our uninformed investors are not dumb or something. They know that this will happen, but they are still better off holding some of these stocks, although they know that they have an unbalanced portfolio on this. So, because otherwise, as I said, the only alternative for them would be to put all their wealth in the risk-free assets, and this wouldn't be beneficial for them either. So now, this is the situation that with obvious distributional implications. So this seems also to be bad. And now Easley and Ohara look into the question, what happens if we reduce information asymmetry? So if we, and here, this is important, I have a slide on this in a sec. So when they talk about reducing information asymmetry, what they are implicitly doing is they're increasing the level of information that these uninformed investors get. Because the total amount of information is fixed, right? So the only way to reduce information asymmetry is to make more people informed. Yeah, so to give more people these additional signals that only the informed people have. So this reduces information asymmetry. And when you introduce these information asymmetry, then two things happen. A, the prices become more informative across two channels. The first channel is, well, the people that are now informed obviously directly have better information, and they can trade on this better information. And then there is a second order effect because of the price change being induced by these informed traders now, the newly informed traders now trading on the new information. Also the uninformed, that are still uninformed, the uninformed traders get better price signals, and they can use these better price signals to adjust their willingness of pay, and this gives another round, if you want, of increasing of precision, right? So you have these two channels that make these prices more precise, right? And then there is the effect of cost of capital. This is basically let's say the other side of the coin. When you think about the cost of capital here, again you have these two effects. The investors that are now informed, they understand better, hey, the risk for these stocks now is lower for me because I'm now informed, so my expectation of the value of the stock has now a much smaller variance, and because I'm risk averse, this lower variance directly translates to a higher willingness of pay, meaning the price will go up, cost of capital will go down. Okay, so that's the first thing. And the second thing, again, is exactly the same argument like before. Now, also the uninformed investors, they are still uninformed, but they get better pricing signals. And these better pricing signals help them to narrow their estimate of the future value of the stock. So also for them, the variance decreases, less so, but it still decreases. And that means that also they have a higher willingness to pay, meaning price increases, cost of capital decreases. Okay, so this sounds great, right? So if you are an accounting socialist and you want to reduce the information asymmetry across investors, then this sounds really awesome, because you think, okay, this is good because this will reduce cost of capital, and reducing cost of capital also has other good effects for the economy, because if the cost of capital declines, investment can grow, firm can make more investment decisions, increasing employment and so on. So welfare. It seems like it is a good thing, right? Now, this is a very interesting analysis, and I think it's also very, very insightful, but it has been misunderstood by the literature a little bit. And I want to make 2 points here. So the first point is about this notion, reduction of information asymmetry is always good, right? Will always reduce the cost of capital or something like this. So I think that this understanding might be a little bit short-sighted, and also, I'm not alone with this, because this is the basic read of the literature now what follows. So, and here I have this, a little bit, uninformative graph maybe, to explain you what I mean here. So now what I try to talk about here is the association between information asymmetry and information precision. So the first line that I want you to look at is this dark blue greenish line here. Which has this negative slope. Okay, so what you see here is this is the setting of Ohara. So in Ohara we have the total information fixed, so the total information is constant, and we increase or reduce information asymmetry by varying the share of this information that is private. Okay, so if information asymmetry is really, 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 really high, okay, so that would translate to very few of this information being private, and then so that means that very few is public. So there's a big information asymmetry between the privately informed and the publicly informed, and then this is also akin to a situation where there's relatively low information precision. Now, you are in the lower right corner of this greenish line. So now you can think about making more and more of this information public. This reduces information asymmetry. At the same time, it increases information precision, right? Exactly the mechanism that I explained a minute ago. So meaning that now these newly informed investors can impound their information into price, making the price more precise. Okay, so now this means that as information asymmetry decreases in the Ohara setting, information precision increases. So this goes hand in hand, right? Two good things happen. Information asymmetry is being decreased, this sounds good. At the same time, information precision is increased, also sounding good. So this is the Ohara. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that there is another aspect. You can understand information asymmetry differently, and then this would give rise to this yellow line. So think about the following setting. There is public information around. Everybody shares this public information, so you have no information asymmetry whatsoever. You're on the left-hand lower corner, so of the yellow line. So now what happens is some private information is being produced. Somebody has some smart ideas, right? Yeah. So this is cool. So what happens now? What happens is, information asymmetry actually increases, right? So information asymmetry increases because now somebody knows something that nobody else knows. So information asymmetry has increased, right? Because somebody has uncovered this new piece of private information. So now what is the effect now for information precision? This is slippery. So now let's assume that we have a setup where the market was aware ex ante that there is some stuff that the market does not know. Okay, so everybody has the same level of information, but there was some stuff that was basically unknown to the market, right? So these were, in a Rumsfeldian view, this would be the known unknowns. So something that was unknown to the market, but the market knew that there was something that the market does not know. Okay, so now what happens then is that the fact that now somebody knows has actually a positive effect on information precision. So information asymmetry and information precision, as indicated by the yellow line, are now positively associated. Yeah? So there is a positive correlation between the two, simply because as information asymmetry increases, because people discover this type of information, now information precision increases. Okay, and this information precision increasing actually will also in this setup will lead to a reduction of cost of capital. So now cost of capital is actually being decreasing, although information asymmetry is actually increasing. You see that? This sounds a little bit confusing, but the idea is simple. Yeah, so you have a setup where now somebody knows something, and this increases information asymmetry. At the same time, the market benefits from this. So the prices become more precise. Yeah, and this then reduces the cost of capital, yeah, by increasing the inequality of investors. And the critical point here for this to hold is that the market was aware of the lack of knowledge before. Yeah, so that the market was aware that there is something that nobody knows, and has priced this, yeah, this risk, and now this risk is now basically being reduced by an increase in information asymmetry, and this leads to a reduction of the cost of capital. Okay, so I think this is important to keep in mind when somebody tells you, well, information asymmetry has an increasing effect on the cost of capital. Read Easley Ohara 2004. You can now answer, well, this depends on the type of how you model information asymmetry, and that there will also be cases where information asymmetry actually might have a positive impact on the cost of capital, meaning that it reduces cost of capital. Okay, so I think this is important to see. And as I said, you could come up with a different setup where you'd say that the new information that is being uncovered is more of an unknown, meaning that the market was not aware that this insecurity actually exists in the first place, on which the new investor, the better informed investor, now has information. If you have such a setup, yeah, so this would again be a very different story, because then you would have two effects. The first effect would be the market was extremely mispriced before because it was absolutely ignorant of some risk. Yeah, so they didn't even price the risk because they were ignorant that the risk exists. And now there is new information, and this new information unreels two things. A, the market was wrong all the way. Yeah, so there's now a new risk or insecurity that needs to be priced. And B, we learn a little bit about this. Yeah, so then you have two effects. The first effect is the cost of capital would go up because of this new risk that has never been priced before, and then it would go down a tiny little bit because now we know a little bit about this risk. Yeah, so sorry for talking so long about this not so nice slide, but I hope that it helps you to understand a little bit how complex this notion of information asymmetry actually is. Yeah, and we should be cautious by just jumping into very simple statements like information asymmetry is bad for capital markets and it increases cost of capital, and so on. So information asymmetry can also be the outcome of genuinely new information, and this genuinely new information can actually be good for the capital market. So let's be cautious here. Okay, good. Another thing that I would like to make before I wrap up this unit is that also that Easley Ohara has been cited for arguing that this type of risk cannot be diversified, that it is not diversifiable in the economy. And to be fair to Easley Ohara, this is not what they claim, and this is also not what they can claim, because in their multi-asset framework, the assets they have multiple assets, but these assets are uncorrelated by design. So the returns of the assets are independently distributed. So and because of that, it's very hard for them to make any statement about diversification, because the idea of diversification is obviously to think about a setting where you have partly correlated returns and there's a covariance matrix, and there is no covariance matrix in Easley-O'Hara. So I think there have been other studies building on an Easley-O'Hara that look more into the diversification problem, but I think in principle it's wise not to understand Easley-O'Hara as a paper that speaks to diversification a lot. So this is my take on this. Okay, good. So these are the points that I wanted to make with respect to Easley-O'Hara. Now let's try to wrap all this up. So what do we see here? We see that in a world where information is heterogeneously distributed across market participants, and this is the real world, okay? We see that these heterogeneously informed investors will end up holding different portfolios in equilibrium. So this is important because this is clearly different from the CAPM world. So if information is heterogeneously distributed, that leads to different portfolios. Now the problem with these different portfolios is that uninformed investors end up holding bad portfolios, right? So meaning they end up holding too many bad news stocks and too few good news stocks, right? So there are not enough good news stocks in their portfolio, meaning that on average these portfolios are just suboptimal for the uninformed investors. So does that mean that the uninformed investors are dumb? No, it doesn't. It just means that they live with the disadvantage, but it's still optimal for them to hold some risky assets, because otherwise they wouldn't make an acceptable risk-adjusted return. Okay, so now how does this all relate to cost of capital? So the most important thing, at least to me, to understand here is that the driver of cost of capital is information precision. So information precision, the extent how precise our prices are with respect to the available information, this defines the level of uncertainty that is still prominent in the market. So if prices are very precise, there is hardly any insecurity left and cost of capital will be very low. If prices are very imprecise, then there's a lot of information risk remaining in the market, and that means that cost of capital will be relatively high. Information asymmetry will only affect returns or cost of capital if it impacts information precision. Okay, information asymmetry will have in other words, information asymmetry will have an impact on cost of capital, for example, but only through this channel of precision. And this, you can also understand this differently. As prices are common knowledge, information asymmetry in itself cannot be priced. It has to go through the price process. If information asymmetry is there, but it doesn't manifest itself into price at all, then there is no average effect on price. And as such, because cost of capital is basically value over price, there is no effect on cost of capital. Yeah, so this is why, if you want to understand how information asymmetry works on capital markets, you have to understand how information asymmetry affects the precision of prices. So it will affect the precision of prices, and the precision of prices itself affects the information risk that is existent in the market, and this information risk is what is being priced in and reflected in the cost of capital and expected returns. Okay? So this is it. So that's the last element of this unit. I think it is quite a demanding framework to think about. Yeah, but try to keep things simple. Capital markets are, like every market, tools for information discovery. They will never succeed in discovering all information. If they would break down. Information is costly, and this means that in the end, not all information will be priced. And this gives rise to heterogeneously informed market participants, creating information asymmetry. Information asymmetry is problematic because it has distributional effects. Yeah, so the poorer informed market participants will lose on average. The better informed market participants will gain on average. It also has another effect on information precision. It can make prices more or less precise depending on the nature of the information asymmetry. And information precision in turn has an effect on the cost of capital. Yeah, so meaning that if markets are very precise, then the cost of capital will be relatively low because there's no information risk left. Yeah? And so this is, of course, another important takeaway from the role of informational markets. So whether this information risk can be diversified or not critically hinges on whether it affects something that covaries across stocks or not. If it does not covary across stocks, then chances are high that it will be diversified away, or at least in part can be diversified away. But if it also affects the cross, so the covariance of stock returns, then it will be also most likely be there when the market is large and the economy is wide. Good. That's it. Looking forward to the discussion session coming up, and see you there. Okay. Cheers.